Monarch Money has released a huge update on how you can budget inside the app. There are two different ways now. We have the category budget and the flex budgeting. Now, flex budgeting is a concept where it is separating your budget into three key components. It is the fixed bills, the regular monthly, the stuff that can be on autopilot, the flex section, which is the things that are going to vary every month. This is your shopping, gas, parking, going dining out, Amazon, those kinds of expenses, the things that vary quite a bit. And a lot of people struggle with setting budget numbers for those specific categories because they vary so much. So this flex concept is saying, hey, you only budget for one big number to encompass all of these things. So for example, $1,000 to cover all of food, shopping, clothing, or 10,000 or whatever it needs to be for you and your family. But it's just one number that you're generally focusing on. And then the non-monthly expenses. These are things like special occasions, travel, home improvement, the things that are not going to be on a monthly basis, but you absolutely still need to budget for. So that is the flex budgeting process that Monarch has now included in addition to its regular default category budget. And you can choose between which one is right for you and which one makes it easier for you to budget. The flex budgeting is going to be really popular for those who get overwhelmed as they try to set up their budget on category by category level. There's a lot of categories, there's a lot of things to consider, and it might feel really overwhelming. The flex budgeting is going to be so much better for you. It's also going to be really great for anyone who's just starting out with budgeting and just trying to get their feet wet. It's a really great way to start tackling those regular expenses. It's also really fantastic for those who are very comfortable with their spending level, meaning that they're not trying to make any major changes or lifestyle changes, or not trying to reduce spending by a ton. The flex budgeting allows you to set a budget so that you can just maintain your regular spending, make sure that you're spending at a level that you're comfortable with, and just monitor your progress. So I'll be walking you through the pros and cons of both the category budget and the flex budget, show you how to get that flex budget set up and figure out which one is going to be right for you. I'm a financial coach. I help my clients create budgeting systems so that they can save more money, pay off debt, and spend money on what matters most to them. So let's get started. So you are probably very familiar with this layout. If you've been using Monarch Money, you're probably very familiar with this layout of you have your bills, food, auto, like these groupings that Monarch kind of comes in by default. These things can be completely adjusted. You can have 2 groups, you can have 10 groups, you can rename the groups, you can rearrange these categories, drag and drop these to whatever section that you want. You can delete any categories that you don't want, completely customizable to what you want it to be like. A key thing that has changed about this section is this summary box. The summary box has been updated. When you click on expenses, it does show you the breakdown by group instead of just income and expenses. It does give you a little bit more detail, which is really nice. But we want to look at what that flex budget looks like. So if we go to your settings right here and we click on those settings, we have the option to test out the flex budget and the category budget. I'm going to go ahead and test out this flex budget. All right, so here are those key pieces that I talked about before. We have the fixed bills. These are things that are going to happen on a monthly basis. After that, we have the flex spending. These are things that you can spend on flexibly, lots of categories in there to be tracking and monitoring. So if you have trouble trying to determine how much to put for groceries, clothing, restaurant, dining out, entertainment, gas, like if setting up an individual budget for each of these categories is overwhelming, then the flex budgeting is going to be really, really awesome for you. You can click on this number and it'll tell you, hey, the last 6 months average of what you've spent in all of these categories combined. That way you can set up that flex budget to be as accurate as possible. So maybe we want to set this closer to $1,000 to be your average, even though this month is a little higher. Maybe you want to send it high this month, but then set it for your average in the following months. Totally up to you. But if you change this number, that is the number you are focusing on. Now, you may want to set a budget item for individual sections, just if you have one or two areas that you want to be tracking or don't want to pace yourself during the month. If you want to pace yourself on groceries, for example, you might want to set a budget for $500 on groceries. And what that means is that this pop-up comes up saying available flex budget, meaning you have $500 for groceries, and then you have $500 for everything else if your flex budget total needs to be $1,000. So it allows you to pace yourself. I really wouldn't do that for course, too many categories, just because the point of this fixed flex budget is to make things a little simpler for you, but it can be a great way to just make sure you're sticking to that new flex number, especially if it's a new concept for you. And then we have this non-monthly section here. This is all the things that are, again, non-monthly. These are your sinking funds, periodic expenses. It's lots of names for it, but it all means the same things. It's just stuff that is not going to happen every month, but we need to be saving for. So for example, with auto maintenance, if I click on this gear icon for the auto maintenance section, maybe I want to, this is a new feature, want to be budgeting $1,200 every 12 months. We now have this ability to do the expense frequency and allow it to set up your budget for you based on that frequency. Now, if I do that, I'm going to go ahead and press save, and you're going to notice that there's this little rollover icon here. That means that if I don't use this $100 that I budgeted in November and we move on to December's budget, we're going to see that budget line item, so $200. So that means you have $200 now to spend for auto maintenance. Next month it'll be $300 and then $400 and so on and so forth, as you can see there. So it's a very new useful feature that allows you to make sure that you actually incorporate these very, very important things into your budget. Now, one point I want to make about the fix is that the fix, you'll notice, is also still budgeting by category. So both sections, you except for the flexible section, you're budgeting by category still. This flexible budget, you're budgeting one number, but the rest we're doing by category. And the reason for having fix stay as a category grouping is so you want to make sure that these things are on autopilot, but also that you're monitoring them, because you want to be aware when your bills change, when you get charged more for something you should have, or when something forgot to get paid. Maybe I forgot to send the check in for childcare. And I can clearly see that because it hasn't come out yet. But if I had it on a flex budget, I wouldn't be able to see that very clearly. So that's why we normally set this up to be on the category level, so that you can still be monitoring to make sure your bills come out on time and to the proper amount. Otherwise, you might need to make some phone calls. Non-monthly, it could be grouped all in one big lump sum. You can, but we have these on a category level so that you can set up the cadence, how frequently you're going to need these funds. And that can be individual for all of these things, which is why it's normally beneficial to keep this on a category level, which is why that is set for the default in this fixed flex budgeting process. Now, if you are seeing something that you don't want in the flex non-monthly section, or the flex section, or whatever section, maybe dentist is a monthly expense because you have an orthodontist payment or something. Maybe you want to put that in the fix section here. That's where you can do that, is toggle any of these things to move any individual category to another section. If you go to your category settings where you might be used to making changes to your categories, you're going to notice that it's still in the same layout as the original category budget structure. So if you need to move things from fixed flex non-monthly, you'd have to click on each category individually to move them this way. But I actually don't recommend doing that. I recommend doing this instead. If you're ready to move on to the flex budgeting, you're going to click on this gear icon for the settings right here, and we're going to do the budget walkthrough. This is what you'll do if you're a new client to Monarch, but if you've been budgeting for a while, you're going to want to click on this Start Setup. This will help you walk through making sure that your accounts are connected, making sure your budget is correct for any items that you want, or maybe adding groups or adding categories right here in this onboarding process. We're going to click on the flex budget, and this is where you can now drag and drop things between fixed, non-monthly, and to whatever section that you need. For example, if medical is not flexible, it's not happening monthly, and we want this to be more of a non-monthly kind of savings category, we can drag and drop that to wherever it needs to go. Now, if there's categories you're like, I don't need these categories, don't worry, you're going to be able to delete them in the next section. So we're going to go ahead and press continue. Now, the next section is just setting up your budget. If you click on any of these line items here, any of these numbers, it's going to show you the last 6 months of average, last 6 months of spending, so that you can set a budget that makes the most sense for you. If you see a category that you do not want, maybe you don't have kids, if you click on this 3 dots, you're going to be able to disable the category. In the future, you can re-enable this category if you end up needing it. So don't stress, but go ahead and delete any categories that you, or disable any categories that you do not need. This will help remove a lot of clutter from your budgeting process. I highly recommend recommend doing this for everyone. So make sure you go through and determine what categories make sense for you. If you do want to rename them, you can do that right here too. You can edit this category, maybe rename this to kids activities instead of child activities if you like the vernacular better, depends on where you're from. But maybe change the names of these categories to make them a little bit more personalized. Now, I really recommend only changing the names to something that's very like, because the AI system is still going to put stuff that recognizes it as child activities. You don't want to change this to your water bill. Otherwise, every time something comes in that looks like kids activities, the AI is going to still put it in this category regardless of what you change the name to. So make sure when you change the name, you're still staying within like the purpose of the category. Now, that is of course not the case for custom categories. There is no AI defaults for custom categories. So if you have to click this and add a custom bill like your HOA or something, you can do that, and you can do whatever you want there with custom categories. But for these default categories, I'd probably just disable them if you don't need them, or rename them to something very similar. The next section is your non-monthly. So you're planning all the non-monthly expenses. You have the frequency target amount that you want to be saving for in that frequency, and it will help you create that monthly budget. Next section then is the flex budget. Then you're going to be setting that flex budget number. Now in this case, if I set my flex budget to $1,000, I am now over budgeting based on the income that I've budgeted. I have now assigned too much money to these budgets. So it is telling me that I might need to reduce this by $93. And I can easily do that by going and clicking on this, and it adjusts this to say, hey, now you have 7, so maybe I want to do this. Then I've used every dollar, given every dollar job, everything is budgeting for according to the income that I've reported. Now, if you want to do some more detailed work with the flex, you can totally do that by clicking on this arrow to see all the categories involved, and again, deleting any categories that you do not need. And that's it. That's the setup. So it's a really easy, simple process to walk through, and I really recommend doing that, especially if you have not set up your budget yet inside Monarch Money. Now, if you're looking at your flex budgeting process and you're seeing all these categories and you're like, I absolutely hate this, that's okay. You do not have to do this flex budgeting thing. You can go right back to category budgeting if you want a little bit more detail in your budgeting process. Now, something to be aware of before we go back to category budgeting, this process really is great if you're just trying to have a general baseline budget. It's probably the easiest way to set up your budget in Monarch Money. So if you haven't really played with the budgeting features yet, I'd recommend starting with the flex, and then you can add some customizations to it in the category section if you choose to do so. But starting with the flex is a perfect way to at least get your feet wet as far as budgeting goes. Now, something to be aware of is that, again, going back to your category settings, when you're in the flex budget, all your grouping is still relevant on most like categories, right? Food and dining is all grouped together. Auto and transport is grouped together. This is going to stick around for when you change your categories to make it easier for you to find which categories. These are not broken out into fixed, flex, and non-monthly at this time. I don't know if they're changing it in the future. But I really like that for the reporting purposes, because when I run a report on the various categories, I do like to see all the groupings here. I don't like to see all this crazy, I don't want to see fixed, flex, and non-monthly. I do like to see a little bit more data when it comes to my reports. Now, again, something to be aware of, if you do not like how broad the fixed, flex, and non-monthly is, I would recommend going back to categories, the category budgeting, and then deciding how you want to have a flex budget, meaning you can budget by category just like this. You can budget on the category level in the regular way. If we go back to the category budgeting, and remember, I just clicked on settings and went back to category budget instead. And now with my category budget, I'm setting up my budget, but maybe I don't want to categorize by every single category. You can change this to flex on a smaller level. Maybe I just want flex spending on food and dining. So if I click on this gear icon, I can change this to budget by group. And if I press save, it's going to take away the individual budgets, and I can just budget on a group basis. So maybe I just want to set a large $600 for food and dining. I still want to track how much is going to groceries versus restaurants, but maybe you don't want to budget on a broad basis like that. And maybe you want to do that for lifestyle too. You can just do it by group rather than by forcing you to do these 3 buckets. You can just choose which buckets you want to budget on a flex basis. And then the rest of the buckets, like maybe kids, health and wellness, if you want more detail in your grouping and category, you can keep these on a category level or change them by group. It's completely up to you. But it really does just about the same thing. Like, you can create the fixed, flex, non-monthly just with a little bit more customization in your groupings in the category level. So For more complex situations, for more people who are more detail oriented, or if you are really trying to cut back on spending, like if there's lots of areas that you're really trying to focus on reducing expenses because you're trying to save more, pay off debt, whatever it is for you, you're probably going to want to stick to the category level because you can add so much more detail to each category and it will be easier to pace yourself. It's easier to track restaurants and bars if you have a budget for specifically restaurants and bars. And so you may want to keep this on a category basis, but it is completely up to you. If you have questions about this, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to help you determine if category versus flex budgeting is the right way for you. If you also want to have a discussion, talk through different scenarios, look at the different ways you can budget inside Monarch Money, I encourage you to sign up for the workshops. The link is in the description of this video. Sign up for the workshops. We get on group discussions or small discussions where we can talk about different scenarios, why one budgeting method might be better than others, and so that you can get the clarity that you need to start budgeting right away. So again, leave your comments, sign up for those workshops, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more videos on how to budget with Monarch Money. Thank you so much.